Hi, everybody, and welcome to the OutMarket.Pro podcast on YouTube. Happy to welcome my colleague, Ben Allgeier. He is a concierge banker with Stockyards Bank, headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky, my former hometown before I moved to Tampa Bay. So, Ben, welcome. I'm really glad to have you on the podcast.
I really appreciate the invite. It's great to be here, Mark. Looking forward to it.
Great. And thank you for getting up early to do this. So the role of concierge banker, I think I'm going to stumble on this when I say it, is not unusual, but it's also not run of the mill and typical. So probably a lot of people in the audience don't know what a concierge banker is and does. So let's start there.
Concierge banking. Well, that's a great way to start this thing. I guess we need to explain what's going on here. It is pretty much what it sounds like. Concierge is a service type of a model. I think when anyone hears the word concierge, you think of catering, catered to unique, tailored offerings. And that's pretty much what we do. We work with a specific type of clientele here at Stockyards Bank Private Banking. And those clientele have unique needs, high-level needs typically, that we are accustomed to servicing.
And my understanding is there are several categories of clients that you typically seek out to provide this service for. And what are those?
So we do have a box to keep the regulators happy and fair lending laws in check. We have a box around who and how we can service those folks. So what that box looks like for me is any sort of a medical professional. These would be doctors, dentists, pharmacists, nurse practitioners. We also work with veterinarians. We work with lawyers. Those ubiquitous high net worth individuals, and then also wealthy business owners. All those all-encompassing individuals and those groups of people we work very exclusively with. And again, it's because we understand the unique, very busy lifestyles that these folks live. And a typical brick and mortar retail type of establishment is just not going to be able to provide that level of service.
So it doesn't have to be in that medical profession. It can be any business owner that fits your profile. And there's probably a minimum net income, liquid income. What's that floor that gets people in your door?
So the great thing about Stockyards is that barrier to entry is relatively low, considering some of the other private banking groups in the other establishments. When we're talking about a lady that walks in off the street and wants private banking services at Stockyards Bank, she needs to have a household income of about $250,000, and we would look for about that same amount in liquid investable assets. So those would be non-retirement assets.
Was that 350?
250.
250.
250.
And I think you do have your morning voice going on this morning. So if you could just speak up just a little bit.
Sure.
That'll be helpful.
Yeah, very much so.
That's much better. And feel free to take a sip of coffee to wet the whistle.
I think microphone placement's key.
Yep. Oh, that's perfect.
So it's rare, Mark, though, that we would have that individual come in off the street and say, I saw your sign, I like the way it looks, and I want to talk to a private banker. Certainly we get those calls, but most of that is word of mouth and referral from an existing client. And that's pretty much how we spin most of our business off. It is the word of mouth referrals, because as we'll probably touch on later in a little more detail, it is all about the relationship management, and the relationships are paramount to the business. So it's rarely walk-in business that we do have, but if they do meet those thresholds, they would qualify for private banking services at Stockyards. Now, a lot of the other banks, certainly the bigger name banks, their private banking thresholds are in the 7-figure range. So we're able to really work with, again, these communities, these individuals and these groups who need this level of service. Pharmacists, for example, who work crazy hours, but deserve that service, especially considering the good deeds they do for the community. And we want to be able to give back and help wherever we can.
Maybe let's back up a little bit and talk about your background, and how you got to this king of the hill position, probably for bankers. And is it a coveted position amongst your peers?
So I don't know if I would call it the king of the hill. It's very kind of you. I certainly love what I do. I've been at this bank 13 years. As a matter of fact, this is the only bank I've worked for. Stockyards Bank was founded in 1904, Louisville, Kentucky, at the old stockyards where folks would trade their cattle and then head across the street to the bank to cash their checks. We were a single branch until 1989, at which point we started to branch out. We have then since infiltrated the Cincinnati and Indianapolis markets. A few recent acquisitions have put us into central Kentucky and down in the Bardstown area. Now we are an $8 billion institution with well over 70 branches in our network. And I would be remiss if I didn't express upper management's intent to stay independent and to stay community, because those are the core values of our bank. And one story I always like to tell, Mark, you've probably heard this before, is the story several years ago when I lost my father. And I was a support individual at the time. I had no title, and I was at this bank for 4 years. That's a decent amount, but not a long time. And when I lost my father, it was unexpected, and it was on a Friday afternoon. The bank was about 450 employees at that time, which is not a small number. The president and the CEO and chief lending officer, so essentially 1, 2, and 3 in this company, all came to my father's visitation. And that really resonated and still resonates to this day with me. And whenever I work with clients, prospects, or other employees, referrals for good help, which we all know is a very big problem in today's working environment, I make sure to tell that story, because as offers have come across my desk for other banks, which happens quite often in the banking industry, especially in Louisville, Kentucky. It's pretty small. I've looked the other way and never really given them serious thought. Have I passed up on more money? Sure, yes. But there is a culture at Stockyards Bank that's second to none. And I'm very proud to be part of that culture and to tout that to the world, because I love it there. So you asked several questions. I got off on the tangent about that, but I do love expressing that very much. So it's dear to my heart. I started in the freight industry when I graduated college. I have a criminal justice degree, and the freight industry didn't work for me. I was still young, so I decided to get a job at a bank for a year or so until I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. So Mark, 13 years later, I've gone from operations roles, loan operations roles, to support roles in business banking and commercial lending, where I really cut my teeth on the lending aspect of things. Then a management role in private banking for a number of years, where I really learned how unique that bank and also that department is, to a higher level management and business development role in our retail branch network. I oversaw 3 branches with about 25 employees and managed a book of business that was about $9 million at that time. Then I came back to where I am now, and that is a private banking relationship manager. It is rather coveted. These spots are harder to fill by the day, with a good qualified individual who can manage both the relationship management aspect and the credit piece. Stockyards is pretty unique in the sense that there is a 2-pronged approach to what I do. And inside of the role, that approach is to manage those relationships and define that business, but then also to be that first line of defense from an underwriting standpoint. So I have to know the credit forwards and backwards. I don't want to get too far down this in case we want to touch on it later. But a lot of the other bankers in different institutions will headhunt, if you will, and they'll find the business and then pass it off to some sort of a central underwriter. And they may have a loose idea of what that credit looks like, but not as intimately as I do. And I think that only goes to help either make a quick decision and inform the prospect or client that this is not a feasible loan for X, Y, or Z reasons, or to go to bat for that particular credit and client and understand that there's more than just the numbers behind those numbers. And that applies to both the credits that we underwrite as, again, well as the people and the clients that we serve. It's very personal. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, very fully. How many people do what you do at Stockyards, and how many contemporaries, that's not the right word, how many people do what you do in the city of Louisville, ballpark? You probably could have a convention in a coffee shop, I'm guessing.
I think you're about right. Another interesting point too is I'm not an investment banker. So the private banking nomenclature is thrown around to many different meanings. Some folks, Fifth Third, for example, their private banking department handles both any lending needs as well as the investment management services. I am strictly a lender. So, and we will get into more of, what my role is, but I quarterback that relationship. So those folks who just do strictly private banking lending is very few and far between. Some of the other smaller banks, those folks will do any and everything. You find business, you do it. Some folks are limited to the business side of things. There may be folks who just do the consumer side of things, but it would be a respectable but not huge coffee shop to put everybody in Louisville in. In Louisville private banking, we have 8 bankers. And then we also have a private banking division in Central Kentucky, Indianapolis, and Louisville. And we've got a division manager over each one of those departments. And when I started, we had just gotten Indianapolis and Cincinnati off the ground from the private banking aspect of it. And again, those started with one person, Mr. Stephen Brown in Cincinnati, who's a fantastic individual and resource. We put him up in Cincinnati and we said, have at it. And that was a one-person show. He built the brand, he built the retail arm, he built the commercial arm, he built the private banking arm. And now he is a very successful market president up there.
Nice. So let's talk about, and that's interesting that your role excludes investing. And I can see what the wisdom in drawing that line, because it's a different role, isn't it? It's your role is more support, quarterbacking, headhunting opportunities, and not getting into the nitty-gritty of investing, which is just a whole different animal. So I can see how it's a good division.
It is. I don't follow the market too closely enough to be dangerous, but I'm not the expert, and I try to avoid incriminating myself to any sense. I think the methodology there for us, Mark, is we want to be specific in what we do. And that is the credit piece. That is the servicing piece. We also handle deposits, so checking accounts, savings accounts for our clients. But we have a very successful wealth management group, our trust company, who handles that exclusively. And then we also partner with Raymond James as our brokerage firm, who will step in with some of the smaller dollar investment accounts and manage those for us. So really, there's no room, and quite honestly, I appreciate the specificity of what I do.
Yeah, it allows you to specialize and really stay focused. Let's talk about, let's get into the details of how you might service a client. So talk about let's talk about onboarding a new client, and with as much depth as you would want to do, how you do your discovery, assess what their needs are, introduce yourself. Would this typically involve dinner with the client and spouse? How do you get to know people? And I don't know, just talk about the process.
That's a great part and one of the larger aspects of the job. And it's all over the map. Mark, I could get a referral from an internal client, one of my internal partners, perhaps, maybe somebody in our commercial arm might have a business owner who has a specific need. And that is a very quick, easy introduction and referral. We appreciate those overall in the bank, not just my department, because we've got a good understanding of that person, how they run their business, who they are, and it gives us a lot of confidence when it comes to the credit side of things. Other than that, it may come from word of mouth from an existing client. Somebody may like what they see from the Stockyards brand. But a lot of what I do is through networking events and being present and visible out in the community. And so whenever those leads do come across my desk, usually it's a coffee or maybe a lunch. I don't necessarily need a specific need in order to cultivate a relationship. What I like to do is I just like to be a resource for the individuals. I like to take them out, get to know them, understand what makes them tick, both financially and personally, what their goals are. All this comes with fact finding and active listening and asking questions and being inquisitive with no expectations on the back end. I want to be the person that person calls when they have a need, because I've been visible and present in their lives, and I've been integrated in asking the right questions and genuinely interested in how I could help. Most folks have a banking relationship, and I think when anybody thinks about changing banks for one reason or another, that's the last thing that they want to do. So the goal is to cultivate a relationship, and that is a very long sales cycle. Some days I do wish I could get up and sell widgets and make a few phone calls and try to get the bottom dollar and make the lowest bid. But that's just not what we do. It's long-standing relationships, trusted relationships with quality, both employees at Stockyards Bank and quality clients. Our credit quality is the utmost importance to Stockyards. So that has helped us weather some economic storms. And a quick note, another plug to Stockyards is in 2008, in that crisis, we did not have to take $1 of the TARP money. We were all self-funded. We were not bailed out in any way, shape, or form. And a lot of that is a testament to our credit quality. We're relatively picky in that sense, which is quite the compliment to those that we want to do business with.
Can you actively recruit? Can you market and recruit clients? Going after on LinkedIn, making an introduction, a cold introduction. Are you? I know that the securities industry has very strict rules for marketing, and I think banking does as well. But in your position, would you be able to go after a senior surgeon at a local hospital, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And that's encouraged to a great degree. Unless there's a non-compete in play from another institution, which there's not. Again, 13 years at this bank. It is all, it's all fair. And that is a lot of what we do. Reaching out, introductions. I want to get to know you. Let me see where we can help. And then making those quarterly or semi-annually touch bases just to check in. How was the trip? How was your vacation? How are the kids doing? You mentioned you were struggling with some elbow pain. How's that going? Again, we're building a relationship here, and we are both interdependent on each other. My success is dependent on the client's success and vice versa. So we want to make it as mutually beneficial as possible. And with that comes some vetting and some fact finding, and just no expectations, because at some point the incumbent bank is going to drop the ball. And we want to make sure that we're there to service those folks when that opportunity arises.
I bet you're called upon for some very unusual referrals. If you're doing your job and staying in good contact with your clients, you probably get asked for all sorts of referrals. If I'm correct, what are some of the more unusual requests you've gotten? And you're there to be a resource, and it's probably not just about money.
It's not. So I got a couple of stories. These are high level, not specific to me, but whenever somebody asks a similar question to that, Mark, I always love talking about this. One is how you really win clients. And one of the bigger clients at Stockyards Bank Private Banking a number of years ago had an issue where they were about ready to board a plane. Their money card became inoperable. They had no cash in the house, and they needed cash immediately. My now director at the time went to his own bank account, pulled out a couple $1,000s of his own cash, let these people board this plane and go on this vacation with his cash, knowing that they're good for it. And it was the right thing to do because these are good people and they were just in a very, very particular specific time crunch.
Did he do an O.J. Simpson run through the airport to meet them at the gate and
I wish
pass the
this
cash?
I wish this was a Hallmark movie, Hallmark-esque movie type of finish to that. No, I believe it was pretty formal, but just the act of that personal trust solidified that bond in that relationship. So that's always going to give us the first look. You know, when we do that and we go that extra mile, that's going to give us the first look. Another interesting piece of lending we've done, we've lent money on several boats, a couple high-end Ferrari collections. That's something that you're not going to be able to walk into and get approval on. Typically, if you're buying a Ferrari for a few $100,000 anyway, there's some sort of an established relationship, some sort of a net worth there. And just a side note, not everybody who looks good on the surface looks good on paper. That's been a big eye opener to me. So folks, manage yourselves appropriately above and below the surface. But we did lend money on a box seat at Churchill Downs, and some folks needed some cash to do some, I think this was for a business investment. They didn't have any collateral. We weren't wild about going unsecured on this particular investment. So we came up with a very creative solution. Again, unique clients with unique needs need creative solutions. And we lent money on this box seat of Churchill Downs. And that was on the books for several years. It may have even been renewed once. So I got to say,
to the audience, that's where the Kentucky Derby is held. Was this like an emergency? They needed an emergency box for the Kentucky Derby, and it had to be done that day.
They, Mark, the funny thing is they already owned the box. They just needed money for something else. And, you hear a lot of times people being cash poor, asset rich or fully vested in real estate and cash poor. We see that from time to time. Not to say that those aren't good folks and not credit worthy, but we have to be creative. Now, some things have changed and it makes it a little more difficult to do some of that banking the way it used to be. But it's still fun to think about that was a thing in the not too distant past.
Did they need some extra pocket money to bet on the horses too? Hey, can you spot me an extra 10 grand?
I'd have to go look at that loan, make sure it didn't go belly up, but I'm thinking that one made it out okay. So,
so let's keep going with the onboarding. You would, I assume, assess their needs. Let's say it's a fledgling dental practice. Let's use that as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through the types of things that you would present as possibilities for you to assist that new dentist.
Sure. So it would be, it wouldn't be exactly in our wheelhouse to try to save a failing dental practice. But we do have connections to some resources and consultants in the dental community who could help. And that's where that quarterback piece comes in. That's where a good, solid private banker with a good network can really pay dividends beyond just getting you your loan. And that's that relationship that I keep referring back to. What we do very well, though, is a startup, acquisition, expansion of an existing dental practice. And so what we would do is we would look at this doctor's financials personally and the business side of things. And maybe we would offer her a few suggestions on what we see from some of the pieces that can cause pain points in the past. Maybe the labor cost is a bit outside of what we would like to see. Maybe there's too much depreciation or not enough depreciation in that equipment that she has. And so as a tax advantage, and again, I have to be very cautious how we approach this because I am not a tax professional and I can't give tax advice. However, there is some immediate benefits to depreciation from a tax standpoint. So really, it all starts back to that first coffee meeting. What does that client want, or what does that client think she wants? And then we can build on that. But it is a full comprehensive understanding of her practice, her history, her family. Where does she want to be in 5 years, 10 years? How does she want to grow the brand? And all that can dictate the level and the nature of the conversations that we have. And then a lot of it is getting the financials in hand. Once we get those financials in hand, then we can make more unique suggestions, more specific suggestions to her situation and tell her the feasibility of the deal. I'm working with a nurse practitioner right now, and she's going to start her own boutique medical facility. Now, the initial meeting and consultation was this grand vision of a multi-level 8,000 square foot floor plan, all encompassing with multi-disciplines in the practice. So we're talking primary care, a dentist on site, psychiatric care, the full boat. And her and her husband do very well. But it took us to look at the financials, look at the business plan, offer some suggestions, put her in touch with the Small Business Development Center to further tweak that business plan and her projections, to come back and say that you might be getting a little too far over your skis. And maybe we need to start small because an expansion is always possible. But once you put that massive facility in place, you got to have the wherewithal behind it, or we could be setting you up for failure. And so after a couple meetings, again, coffee meetings, lunch meetings, phone calls, emails, site visits to several of the sites that she was eyeballing, we've been a resource and we put up some foul poles for her, which has been very helpful. Now she's confident in her decision. She found a plot of land. She's moving forward with that. And we are assisting in the due diligence items for the construction firm that's been engaged for the project in order to get a full approval on this rather large construction loan.
Nice. What are some of the more unusual requests other than Derby Churchill Downs tickets? Some of the more unusual requests for funding, of course, you need to protect your clients, your prospects, et cetera. But
sure.
Can you talk about some unusual requests?
Oh, a lot of folks think that unsecured money is easy to come by. That's not the case. $100,000 of unsecured money is $100,000 of unsecured money. And we typically like to back that up somehow. I think most people understand that there are things that you just can't do. We have had several folks, and this is maybe something for an entirely different topic, but getting into the THC and marijuana business. And that is a whole nother can of worms because it's so new. and the regulation is spotty across the board and inconsistent, we have had to turn down several of those deals to do that. Other than that, when
I
people,
don't even think they're allowed to, that banks are allowed to do credit card processing for them, and they end up being cash businesses.
it's
even where it's legal.
And that's unfortunate, because now you've heard the horror stories of these people, these individuals, these families sitting on all this cash, and break-ins, and because predators, they know that there's cash on site because they can't do anything else with it. And I hope that we get up to speed with that as quickly as possible. And it makes our job very difficult as bankers, because we want to help the community, but we need to stay within the confines of the law. And when it's gray, we're going to err on the side of caution, especially Stockyards Bank being as relatively conservative as it is. And that just, again, pays dividends when there is a crisis. No doubt about that. But, folks, rich people want money to do their rich things. And those are vacations, those are yachts. I had somebody eyeballing a $30 million yacht, owns successful car dealership owner. That's a tough one, even for Stockyards Bank Private Banking Group. A $30 million yacht is pretty difficult to get done. So I don't know if that one's going to happen or come to fruition.
Planes,
yes, we've done planes. Usually those are in some sort of a partnership. The Cessnas are relatively common, but we also have a few jets on the books, and those are more substantial. And I will say, working with the FAA can be pretty difficult, just because it's so foreign to most folks. Quick story about plane lending. When I was in business banking doing some of that work, we had a very, very difficult plane loan where tail numbers got mixed up. And I thought this loan was going to be the death of me. I mean, it was a month of just confusion and frustration and phone calls. When we finally get to the end of it, the deal is done. It was actually split between two loans to two different LLCs. And fast forward about a year and a half, I make my first trip skydiving. And wouldn't you know, as soon as I pull up and turn the corner, this plane, tail number N867 LA, I'll never forget it, is sitting right out there. And I said, Mark, if that's the plane I get on to skydive, I'm not walking away. Thankfully, that plane took off and I got on another plane, which was an equally hairy moment, because when the pilot jumps in with his parachute already strapped to his back, it doesn't give the best vote of confidence for that plane ride up to 10,000 feet. But we made it. I'm here to talk about it. Needless to say, I'm not going to skydive anymore. I'm done.
Yeah, your number was up with that tail of that plane, wasn't it?
I used a life, that's for sure.
And remind me when we're off camera, I've got a skydiving joke for you.
Okay. Love it. Love it.
What are some of the challenges of your work? I'm sure that handing the keys to the Ferrari are happy moments for you, but they're bound to be challenges. And my guess is, and let's check it out, is that when you have to deliver the bad news, and it's a relationship that's either budding and you're trying to nurture it, or it's been established and you're having to disappoint. But there may be other challenges, but I'm guessing that's one of the bigger ones.
It can be. I think to expand that a little further, Mark, the challenge really there is managing expectations. And that's with anything in life, right? But especially when you deal with a client base and you have set the expectation that the expectations will be high. And that bleeds into calls and text messages on the weekends, which I don't mind in the right situations. and certainly want to be accessible. It can be abused though. So setting that appropriate expectation and then meeting that and treading that line can be very difficult. Nobody wants to hear no. Most of the times though, our folks understand, especially the clients that I work with, if we have to give them a no, there's a reason. Now, we have had folks who got the no and they didn't like that answer, maybe because they've never been told no in the past, which is probably more likely the case. Well, and they've very few, but there have been clients that have taken their business elsewhere. And, that's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, you can't win them all and you can't please everybody as much as I honestly try. So that's a big challenge. Overall, though, we face a lot of challenges. You got to think, my role as a banker, I'm squarely stuck in the middle. I'm trying to cultivate and win clients and sell the bank to the clients and sell myself to the clients. And then, Mark, what do I do? As soon as I put the year work of legwork in, I turn around and then I have to sell the client to the bank and my bosses. And I got to build that story, right? Build the brand and go beyond just the numbers. That's what I love about my role in Stockyards Bank Private Banking, is it's not just numbers. I'm not going to turn some financials into a central underwriter and then get a no or get a yes. I'm going to make my case. I'm going to explain what the debt service coverage is, how I got there, why there are mitigating factors to some of the loan exceptions, for example, based on our loan policy, and then sell that to that. But it's very unique because I'm selling both sides and I'm making a case on both sides. And so sometimes that can be quite frustrating. So that's challenging in and of itself. I'd mentioned the long lead. I mean, thankfully I've got a pretty big expense budget and I don't worry too much when I go to a nice dinner. That's what we do. We wine and dine clients. That's what people like. But it is a lot of work and there's a long tail there. And it's all about the relationship. And you could go for years building a relationship and then that opportunity never comes. I'm not going to say it's wasted because there's always lessons to be learned in every interaction. But when it doesn't come to a full relationship, that's frustrating. So the lead time is challenging, as is, the government regulation. Again, we are just getting squeezed tighter and tighter by the day, it seems like, which permits us to do less and less. And when we have these clients who have these needs, it becomes very difficult. So I had a client, a very successful CPA, who made a very substantial salary at that previous role, left the firm and went out on their own. Well, as a result of the lack of 2 years of verified employment, because we changed jobs, even though this person made, well over $400,000 a year, we had to get very creative and do an in-house portfolio loan. So not something that was on the secondary market. And so that's got exceptions all over it. And, nothing's easy anymore. There's always something that comes up. So there's a little challenge sprinkled into just about everything. And one of those is finding that creative, unique solution. And then again, furthermore, selling that to the bank after I've brought that client or that situation on board to them. And certainly the rate environment in the economy. I mean, we are very dependent on the health of the economy and those rates. How many business owners have tabled the idea of an expansion, right? Or that new conveyor belt or an add to staff even, so they can continue to facilitate the growth of the company because rates went from X to Y. And we see that every single day. And I think 2023 is going to be a stressful year in that sense for us. We hope that rates are going to level off and plateau, but I think certainly for the first half of next year, you're going to see a couple more small rate hikes, depending on where the inflationary and unemployment numbers come out. And if they continue to stress these rates to try to combat this inflation, that is going to make the challenges that much more almost insurmountable. The refinances are gone. Again, I don't do mortgage lending. So that was a point, Mark, maybe that we didn't clarify, or I didn't clarify early enough. I don't do the secondary market mortgage lending. That's where I quarterback that relationship. But I do have in-house portfolio loans that I offer to those clients. Those are still subject to those external market rate factors, though. However, if I was a secondary market lender and those refinances just absolutely dried up, I would be in a whole different world of hurt right now, and I would probably be under a lot more stress. So lots of different challenges in the job. It's never a dull moment. It's a lot of fun. You have to take the work hard, play hard mentality into it. There's a notion about bankers hours. I try to be a little more colorful than that. That's certainly not my personality. Anybody who knows me outside of the bank knows that I'd rather be probably under the hood of a car or out in the woods doing something like that than in the bank. But I tell you what, it's a great fit, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love what I do.
I'm sure you get some really fulfilling moments when you're helping somebody reach a dream. And maybe we can talk about a couple of those where your hair stood up on your arms and the back of your neck with that moment. It's not exactly this type of moment, but probably close, where a realtor walks in with their client into a new home that checks all their boxes and just fits. They know it's theirs, their home. You've probably had some nice victory celebrations when a big deal, especially with a lot of hurdles on the way, comes through. Any of them come to mind?
Yeah, I've got a few. And most recent one was a relatively low dollar home equity line of credit. So stockyards will offer a promotion every now and again, a couple of times a year. And we will, for example, fix a rate for 12 months below the prime rate, which is where a home equity line typically sets. Very successful pharmacist in town, single parent, 4 kids, and just got in a little too much credit card debt and was having trouble managing that, even with a very solid salary that they made. So it wasn't easy because there was a couple of those aforementioned exceptions that I had to get around. But Mark, we were able to eventually work in an appropriate maximum credit amount, take a second mortgage on their home, execute a home equity line of credit, and then save this individual $800 a month in interest payments. That's substantial for a household with 4 children. And that's where the private banking shines through at Stockyards, because it was a no on the surface. There was a request, it went in, it didn't meet the credit metrics. And in pretty much any other institution, that'd be a hard no. But I knew that that's what we were going to be up against. So I instantaneously went to the drawing board, figured out how we could get this to work, what other debt we could refinance, how we could adjust the maximum credit amount, and ultimately put all those moving pieces together to come to some sort of a successful conclusion. And that's where we ended up. And so it's that kind of flexibility and accommodation that I think really helps. Another one is this helping this individual's dream come true that we talked about previously on this boutique medical facility. Very selfless individual, this person is. And I could tell that there's a dream, and she wants to help people, but she can't do that without some sort of a partner. And so we've been that resource. And while we are still a long ways from completing the facility and opening those doors, I've already seen the confidence in her eye in the ability for her to put this dream to fruition. And a lot of it just comes with signing that purchase contract for an appropriate piece of land, which ultimately is going to work out perfectly to her. So that dream is still in the making, but when there's already been some many successes sprinkled in that, for sure. And then I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Paycheck Protection Program during the COVID-19 pandemic. Mark, that was a turning point. That was the paradigm shift in my career, where I went from a job that I enjoyed to a career that I developed some passion about, because I, at that moment, realized that there was an impact to the community that only I could give, and other bankers at that point in time. Multiple stories of people with tears in their eyes after the Paycheck Protection Program funds hit their account during that first round. I mean, those 10 days when that round opened were crazy. I'm inputting applications on Easter, and not to toot my own horn, but there was some sacrifice there for the greater good of the community. I can't say that as a banker I'd really been convinced of that before. So there was, when the rubber needed to meet the road, it did. And another great thing about Stockyards Bank, we had the the size and the desire to pivot during that program when we needed to, and it took multiple pivots multiple times a day. Some of the bigger banks just couldn't do that, and there were several folks who were in line for that funding and never got it. There was not one client who needed the PPP money that came to me that submitted an application that I didn't get the loan for.
Nice. I'm sure that is fulfilling.
It was.
Is there an association, a national association of private bankers that do specifically what you do, just on the banking side, not investing, or is it an umbrella association, or is there even an association?
That's a good question. I've never looked into that. We certainly have our KBA, the Kentucky Bankers Association, and we have national associations as well, specific to bankers. But private bankers, I don't know. And it is so unique and tailored for each market and each institution. I don't even know how well that would fit, simply because I wouldn't have too much in common with an investment banker. Because a lot of those investment bankers, while they may do lending, their bailiwick really is the investment side of things. Right. And it makes sense, because wealthy people with assets need both banking and investment services, and maybe they need investment services more than they need traditional lending. So I can see where the model makes sense. I like what I do, but that's a good question. And I think after this, I'm going to actually look into that. Because I would like to know more about how some of the other private banking arms operate, certainly in different states.
Well, and the reason I asked is to sort of get you to look into the future, technology, crypto. I mean, there's so many things going on in your industry. Can you project what your role might change to be 10 years from now? Do you see any trends related to what you do, even though you're not sure about an association? Anything looking forward that you might be able to project?
Ooh, so the brick and mortar at some point, on some level, is going to be go the way of the dodo bird. We've already seen a transition from in-person tellers to virtual teller machines across the country. And Stockyards has several of them in a few of their locations as well. So you get a person on a screen, but you don't get the person at the counter. That may be fine for traditional retail banking, for somebody like me, even who goes in and has a need a few times a year. So the technology is going to change the way in which banking integrates with a household. Mobile deposits are going to be the norm. Checks are going to probably go away at some point. There's the whole talk of digital currency, right? That's all speculative. But the point is, it will change. With all that said, though, specifically what I do, given the relationship piece and the specific nature and clients that I work with, at some point, every business owner is going to realize, whether it's sooner or later, that they need a connection and a relationship with a real person to be able to talk through issues, and for that person to go to bat for them and be there when that business owner needs it most. So with that, I think I'm bit protected. I don't want to be overly confident because that technology is going to change things. But at some point, I mean, I love these Zoom meetings, for example, but it doesn't beat a face-to-face coffee and to really feel that person's energy, and that it's going to be, I think, the future of my particular role in private banking.
Yeah, I was wondering if the use of Zoom during the heat of COVID has extended post, we can't really say post-COVID, but in this new era of COVID, after you do the relationship building sorts of things, if you've got to have a quick meeting, I bet Zoom meetings are a lot more of your daily repertoire.
They are. If a call won't cut it and schedules are too busy, the Zoom is a nice option to have, albeit for me, the last resort.
Okay. It sure is efficient. And
It absolutely is.
I'm finding myself relying on it more and more, not less and less. Okay, well, is there anything that I did not ask you or that you didn't cover that you might like to, about your work, the scope of it, anything or about the bank, anything that we haven't talked about?
No, but I do want to give just a quick piece of advice to all the listeners. Whether you have a need now or not, go build a relationship. Go date a few bankers. Let them take you to coffee. Let them take you to lunch, because the personalities matter. Whenever we refer business inside of the bank, when there's a need for another department, for example, we always try to match those personalities. And, I would encourage you to build that relationship, because it does matter. Relationships matter, and they always will, regardless of how digital we get. And do it now. Don't wait. Doesn't matter how young or old you are. Do it now, because bankers are always happy to spend their money to take you out, to get to know you. And then the ones that have a genuine interest are going to shine through. And I think that will pay dividends going forward for all those folks.
And if someone would like to contact you, and let me ask you this, or do you have any boundaries? I don't mean personal boundaries. I mean geographic boundaries. If someone from down here in Tampa Bay, Florida wanted to work with you, would you be able, do you have artificial barriers against it? I'm sure there's some get to know you sorts of things, but do you have limitations there geographically?
We do. We like to work with clients who primarily reside within our region, within our footprint. A lot of our folks do snowbird. We have investment properties all over the country. Our mortgage company can do those secondary market mortgages in any state in the union. But if we just have an out-of-state borrower, that would typically be outside of our wheelhouse. And again, that all falls into that relationship aspect of it. We want everybody to be comfortable and confident on both sides of the equation with who they're doing business with.
Got it. So if someone did want to contact you, how would they do that?
Email, probably best, Benjamin.Allgeier, Allgeier, and that is at syb.com, as in Stockyards Bank.
Great. Well, no pun intended. You've offered a wealth of information. I guess it's sort of intended. And I really appreciate being able to learn more about what you do and how you do it. You certainly have a demeanor that feels trustworthy. I'll just give you that. And not a staid buttoned up banker, but someone who cares about people. And I'm not basing it just on this interview.
Sure.
To the audience, we're in a networking group and have known each other for about a year or so, but just the level personality that you have and persona that you have, I can see how it engenders a lot of trust on the part of your clients and people thinking about working with you. So I appreciate that about you, and appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast and explain a job function and a profession that most people either don't know about or certainly is not top of mind. So I really appreciate you being on the podcast and sharing your knowledge and experience.
Well, thanks for the kind words. Very complimentary. Really appreciate the time. And that hour absolutely flew by. So I look forward to doing it again.
Awesome. So let me thank Ben formally for being on. Thank you all for watching. You can learn more about OutMarket.Pro by checking out our website at www.outmarket.pro. Email me at mark@outmarket.pro. And if you like the podcast, click the like button, subscribe so that you can get more, and notifications, click that notifications bell to be alerted when the next one comes on. We do these about weekly. We'll put Ben's contact information and mine down in the show notes below. So please feel free to check us out further. And if you know of someone who has an interesting role in the community, whether it's business or otherwise, please refer them to us. And we'd love to have them on the podcast and explore different professions, different types of businesses. So Ben, thanks again. And thanks to all of you for tuning in.